Joker is arguably the greatest comic book movie villain of all time. At the very least, the antagonist from 2008's The Dark Knight is right up there with the likes of Terrence Stamp's General Zod, Ian McKellen's Magneto, and Tom Hiddleston's Loki in contention for that title. In this documentary, we'll chronicle the story of Ledger's journey as the iconic character from beginning to end, in fascinating detail. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It's the best way of keeping up to date with all of Screen Rant's great new videos. Ledger's story, as far as his most iconic role was concerned, would ultimately end in tragedy, but it was also a hugely interesting one. The Joker was already an absolutely iconic character before Ledger portrayed him, arguably the most iconic supervillain in fiction, in fact, having been played by the likes of Cesar Romero in the 1960s Batman TV series, Jack Nicholson in Tim Burton's 1989 Batman movie, Jared Leto in 2016's Suicide Squad, and Luke Skywalker himself, Mark Hamill, who voices the animated version of the character to this day, having started doing so way back in 1992. The character will also be played next year in the first ever Joker standalone movie, with Joaquin Phoenix taking on the role, and it remains to be seen whether or not he can come close to Ledger's level of performance. While Phoenix is undoubtedly an incredibly talented, top-tier actor, he's got some very big shoes to fill. Excitement was abound about the Joker that would face Christian Bale's Batman from the moment he was hinted at in the final scenes of 2005's Batman Begins. Gary Oldman's James Gordon showed Batman a Joker playing card that an unnamed criminal had been leaving at crime scenes, and it sent fans wild. When DC and Warner Brothers began the search for their Joker for 2008's The Dark Knight, their list of potential actors to play the character didn't include the Australian Ledger. The search for the perfect actor was long and thorough, and while the fans wanted to see the likes of Paul Bettany and Jude Law in the role, it was actually stars like Robin Williams, Steve Carell, Adrian Brody, and Hugo Weaving who were the frontrunners, some of whom had quite openly expressed an interest in taking it. It wasn't actually until Ledger met with Christopher Nolan about the possibility of playing the heroic Batman prior to 2005's Batman Begins that the idea of casting him as the Clown Prince of Gotham was spawned. The filmmakers wanted an actor who was not only talented, but also fearless, both of which were traits Ledger had in spades, and his casting was officially confirmed at the end of July in 2006. Ledger first became famous in his homeland, Australia, when he appeared in productions like the children's television series Ship to Shore, drama series Sweat, and popular soap opera Home and Away. He starred in a few Australian movies, then sought out a career in Hollywood. But his appearances in comedies like A Knight's Tale certainly didn't have people imagining he'd go on to play the Joker. Given how brilliantly the whole thing turned out, the widespread scorn and outrage that occurred upon Ledger's casting seems like a lifetime ago, and for some of us, it's hard to imagine it occurring at all. Christopher Nolan was roundly criticized for choosing the actor to play Batman's arch-nemesis at the expense of the other actors we've just mentioned. From some corners, this stank of homophobia, as some supposed fans believed he was unsuitable for the role because of his previous portrayal as the closeted gay cowboy Ennis Del Mar in Brokeback Mountain the year before, despite the fact that said role earned him an Oscar nomination. More level-headed, rational skepticism came from people who believed that Pretty Boy Ledger, who had risen to fame as a teen heartthrob, wouldn't be able to bring sufficient malice to the twisted character. Heath Ledger's face says boy next door was one comment. Even those who remembered him as bad boy Patrick Verona from the teen movie 10 Things I Hate About You found it difficult to picture him as a psychotic comic book movie villain. Others simply believed he didn't carry the weight necessary to play this crucial role. That misplaced prejudice and doubt was so widespread and in many cases so vitriolic that some people thought Ledger would be replaced by somebody else. And if truth be told, even the producers and the studio behind the movie didn't get the casting. Thankfully, however, after all the hate and uncertainty, Ledger remained in the role. Once Ledger was cast, screenwriter Jonathan Nolan, Christopher Nolan's younger brother, took his time to flesh out the character. Jonathan was actually one of the people who doubted Ledger's suitability for the role, but after a heck of a lot of research into the character's historical portrayals, he went on to suggest that a crucial influence on how the Joker was depicted in the movie should come from the character's first two appearances in Batman comics from 1940. Christopher also had Jonathan watch Fritz Lang's 1933 crime film, The Testament of Dr. Maybius, prior to writing the part of the Joker, with the intention being that Joker should have some of Maybius's characteristics. In fact, Christopher Nolan referred to Lang's film as essential research for anyone attempting to write a supervillain. Jerry Robinson, one of the Joker's co-creators, was also consultant on the character's portrayal, so it's fair to say that the Nolans did everything they could to get the villain right. Regarding Ledger himself, as well as adhering to the suggestions of the Nolan brothers, trailers, the actor wanted to make sure that he differentiated his version of the character from that of Jack Nicholson's 1989 version, the most recent previous live-action Joker, who was of course iconic in his own right. When the idea was first presented to Ledger, he said he knew just 5 seconds later how he was going to play it, and singer-songwriter Tom Waits must have come to his mind immediately. Ledger's Joker's mannerisms and voice were practically identical to those of Waits, specifically how he was in a 1979 TV interview. Waits was and still is a very cool guy, but boy were his demeanor and the way he sounded incredibly unsettling. In order to perfect what he correctly believed would be a refreshing and unique version of the Joker, Ledger went to some bizarre extremes. He was no stranger to method acting, and he took his commitment to the role almost ludicrously seriously. Being cast before the script was written meant he had a very long time to obsess about it and really figure out exactly how he was going to go about playing it. Christopher Nolan had him read Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange and study the paintings of Francis Bacon to provide him with some chaotic and emotionally charged inspiration. Johnny Rotten, Sid Vicious, and ventriloquist dummies were also discussed as potential influences for the character's portrayal. Months before production began on The Dark Knight, Ledger retreated to a hotel room and isolated himself from society, at which point he spent time writing a Joker diary and putting together disturbing image collages to help him get inside the character's head. In 2007, the actor spoke to Empire Online from the movie's set and explained it in his own words, saying, "I sat around in a hotel room in London for about a month, locked myself away, formed a little diary and experimented with voices. It was important to try and find a somewhat iconic voice and laugh. I ended up landing more in the realm of a psychopath, someone with very little to no conscience towards his acts." Ledger even played a big part in creating the character's costume. It was never just a case of putting him in that purple suit and saying, "Bam, you're the Joker now." Over a long period of time, he worked with costume designer Lindy Hemming, makeup artist John Caglione, and indeed Christopher Nolan to get everything down to the character's shoes absolutely perfect. When production finally began, Ledger would be on set every day in full costume and makeup, but contrary to common opinion, he wasn't always in character, though he could occasionally be seen snarling to himself in a corner as the Joker, even when the camera wasn't rolling. Ledger would allegedly smoke cigarettes, generally goof around, and give out bear hugs to the cast and crew at both the beginning and end of every workday. When it was time to get into character for filming, however, Ledger had his Joker diary close by, and reading it would enable him to bring the character out at will. As he threw himself into the movie, his sleep began to suffer. The actor told the New York Times that while the movie was in production, he probably slept an average of 2 hours a night, describing how he couldn't stop thinking and how his body was exhausted but his mind was still going. He became restless in everyday life and also started taking Ambien to help him sleep, which some people believe represented the start of a downward spiral. But he was still making a huge impression on his co-stars. Christian Bale said of Ledger that he'd turned up and just kind of completely ruined all my plans, because I'm like, he's so much more interesting than me and what I'm doing. Bale revealed that in the movie's famous interrogation scene, the first scene the two actors actually filmed together, when Ledger's Joker yelled, "Hit me," Ledger really meant it. He wanted Bale to hit him as hard as he could to make the scene look as real as possible. In fact, the room in which the scene was filmed had tiled walls, and Ledger was slamming himself around it with such commitment that the tiles were actually cracked and dented as a result. Meanwhile, Michael Caine was so unsettled by Ledger's in-character presence that the legendary Brit completely forgot his lines at one point. When the first trailer for the movie was released in December of 2007, those whose initial knee-jerk reactions to Ledger's casting were reactions of disgust began to question themselves, and fears about him not being up to the task began to dissipate. The Joker was the biggest talking point of the trailer. His voice, his laugh, his look, his mannerisms, and his now iconic "Why so serious" line all made it into trailer 1.